All right, we are up to Ecclesiastes Chapter 11 this morning. Ecclesiastes Chapter 11. Took a small break from it last week, but we are down here toward the end with just 2 chapters left to go. Likely cover Chapter 11 today, then shoot for Chapter 12 next week. Chapter 10, we saw what foolishness produces. Chapter 10 really spent a lot of time talking about the fool and the different aspects of the fool, right? The fool will let you know who he is, just doing simple tasks. Just it says there in one of the passages, he's just walking by the way and his wisdom faileth him. There's another part where it talks about how the fool, just because he loves to talk and he loves to hear himself talk, he often overcommits himself and he makes promises that he obviously can't fulfill, or he commits so much to the future that nobody knows what's going to happen. And just Solomon had very little time and certainly very little respect for the fool. But chapter number 11, that focus is going to change, because in this chapter he's going to give instruction. He's not going to necessarily rant about a particular person as much as he's going to give some instruction, particularly as it applies to business, sowing and reaping, and then to young men, that they would be mindful of their youth and take advantage of it. Let's read chapter 11. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. If the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not all the works of God who maketh all. In the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thy hand, for thou knowest not whether it shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall alike be good. Truly the light is sweet, a pleasant thing it is for eyes to behold the sun. But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember all the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. Let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. A couple of thoughts here. First of all, let's talk about the laws of sowing and reaping. Okay, the laws of sowing and reaping. He begins the passage by saying, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. That word bread specifically seems to be referring to grain, or that which is used to make bread. He's not necessarily saying to take a piece of bread and throw it on the waters, but he's talking about casting of grain. He's talking about sowing. The idea here, it says even that thou shalt, or cast thy bread upon the waters. The idea here is that a widespread distribution should result in a generous return when it comes to harvest time. So when you go to plant, when you go to sow, cast thy bread and really cast it everywhere. Even maybe in a place that's known to potentially flood from time to time. Don't lack, don't hold back, be busy. Sow, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. The principles of sowing and reaping. Now let's talk about those in light of what the Scripture has to say. First of all, I'll say 3 things about sowing and reaping. Obviously, you reap what you sow. Now, the Bible tells us in Galatians chapter 6, I'm going to turn there and read it so I don't misquote it, but Galatians chapter 6, be not deceived, verse number 7, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Now that's the most basic and the first starting point that everyone would usually mention when they talk about sowing and reaping. It's that you do reap what you sow. That which is planted is that which is reaped, that which is harvested. It would be silly for me to plant or, to spread grain and expect anything else but, that to flourish, right? I wouldn't plant a tomato plant and expect there to be anything else other than that. What a man sows, that's what he's going to reap. The Bible takes that, not just a physical illustration of that, but it even takes it into the spiritual realm where it speaks of a man that sows to his flesh would of the flesh reap corruption, and he that sows to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. A life that is lived, spent continually coddling and providing for the flesh should not in turn, you shouldn't expect a lot of, spiritual benefit or blessing in that. Now that passage doesn't come too far beyond Galatians chapter 5, where it talks about what specifically? The works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. If the fruit of the flesh or the works of the flesh are manifest, and they are these, all of the things that Paul mentions there in chapter 5 about the lusts of the flesh and what they produce, if you were to spend, a lifetime and just looking at those in Galatians chapter 5, adultery, fornication, uncleanness, idolatry, witchcraft, envyings, murders, if you spend a lifetime invested in these and sowing those kind of seeds, it would be foolish to expect to be able to reap love, joy, and peace. What a man sows, that's what he would reap. So that's the first principle of sowing and reaping. The second principle is that you don't reap what you don't sow. In other words, you actually have to perform some kind of task of sowing. You have to actually invest and put the time in, put the effort in, and put the work in. It would be silly for me to have a good crop one year and then go out the next year and just assume, there was a great crop last year. I'm sure there's still some residue there. I would assume it would be just as good a crop this year, but never actually go out and plant, never actually put the seed in the ground. You have to sow for there to be any reaping. Obviously, you would also say, thirdly, that you often reap more than you sow. The Bible speaks of how even just a tiny grain, as it's planted in the soil, what it produces, and it comes forth multiple fold. Now, the Bible speaks about sowing and reaping, and it uses other illustrations for it. In Psalm 126, Psalm 126 is a passage that is often used in with the idea of evangelism in mind. It says in Psalm 126 in verse number 5, "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him." In the book of 1 Corinthians, in chapter 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse number 6. "I have planted, and Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither is he that watereth, but God that giveth the increase. Now he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor." Again, that one really does specifically look like it's tied to evangelism, and the principles of sowing and reaping apply there. Now, it's obviously in that context that God gives the increase, but he that planteth and he that watereth, it is spoken of him having his reward. So the principles of sowing and reaping: "Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days." We always want to remember that. We want to remember the biblical teaching about work, the investment of time and effort and the benefit and the joy and the results that can be reaped from that. I always look at Jacob as an example in the Bible of sowing and reaping. You know, the Bible telling you that whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. And you look through the life of Jacob and some of the things that he did and how those exact things he ended up reaping later on. I think just of a couple things specifically with Jacob. You know, there was a time where Jacob circumvented the usual process of the firstborn receiving the blessing, right? He kind of went around, found a way around that, and took the birthright, took the blessing that belonged to Esau. Jacob actually had to reap that later in his life, right? When he wanted to marry a particular woman, and he was deceived, and his father said, no, that's not the way things work in our country. Obviously, the firstborn has a right. The firstborn has a blessing. And he lived to reap what he had sowed there. As he deceived his father, so his father-in-law deceived him. And there are just so many examples from the life of Jacob where he began to see later in his life some of the things he sowed earlier there. But cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Verse 2, Ecclesiastes 11, verse 2, give a portion to 7, and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. Now there are kind of two thoughts here, and I think both of them can apply. Both of them have some fairly convincing arguments, though. I'm going to give them both to you, let you decide what you think. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8. There are two thoughts that most people think these could fall under. First of all, some think that he's referring to generosity. You know, give with unrestricted kindness. And the reason is because that opportunity may not always be there. You know, it's kind of a habit or a thought process that we have is to, maybe save for a rainy day, right? And yet the advice here, the admonishment is actually to take advantage of the current opportunity, to give and to give generously. Give a portion to 7, give to 8, because you don't know what evil is going to come. You don't know what comes tomorrow. You don't know what opportunities will be there in the future. So while it is within you, while the opportunity and ability is there, give. Give generously, give kindly. It's a good thought. The other thought is that he's referring to diversification. Or, you give to 7, you give to 8 because you don't necessarily want to put all your eggs in one basket, right? You don't know what's going to happen someday. We hear people talk about that today, right? Diversify your portfolio. You know, if you have 100% of your money invested in stocks and then the stock market crashes, well, guess what? You're out of luck. So diversify, right? You put some in stocks, you put some in real estate, you put some in the precious metals like gold and silver. You give to 7, you give to 8. You don't know what's going to happen. And if you've got everything spread out and diversified, maybe if an evil happens to one, you've still got some there on the other. Both are really good thoughts. I think both there could apply. But the intent here really does seem to say in verse 2 that thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. Whatever we do, we are mindful of what we have, how we spend it, how we invest it, how we sow it, because we don't know what is coming tomorrow. Okay? We are taught, regardless of how you interpret that, whether he's speaking of generosity or whether he's speaking of diversifying, because the future is unknown, the present must be spent wisely. Okay? Take advantage of these opportunities. Do what you can with what you have, mindful. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So be wise with that. Now there's a continuation of that thought in verse 3. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. And what's that saying? Well, in continuation from verse 2, Solomon seems to just want to give an honest assessment that, you know what? Things happen. There's not really anything that you can do to stop it. And there's not really much that you can do to undo it once it has come, right? Verse 3 says, if the clouds be full of rain, if you look out there and you see rain clouds, it's obvious that there are rain clouds. It's obvious that there's a storm coming. What can you do to stop it from happening? Nothing. If the clouds be full of rain, they'll empty themselves upon the earth. And once something happens, there's not a whole lot that you can do to undo it, right? If a tree falls, and it says there in verse 3, if it falls toward the north or if it falls to the south, guess what? Where it falls, that's where it falls. There's no rectifying that. There's no, once a tree is cut down or blown down, there's no fixing it, right? There's no taping it back together. There's no gluing it. There's no fixing it. Once it falls, and it's there it lays. So that's kind of a continuation of the thoughts in verse number 2. You don't know what's going to happen. In a very real sense, you don't have control over it either. Even if you knew what was to happen tomorrow, if you knew for sure 100%, there's a 100% chance of rain tomorrow, what can you do today to stop it? Or once it is done, what could you do to undo it? It would be one thing to look after a storm or after, whether it be a thunderstorm, lightning storm, and it knocks down some trees and some power lines. Yeah, a lot of wishful thinking afterwards. Man, I wish these disasters did not happen. There's not really anything that you can do afterwards to undo it. So, yet even more of an encouragement, a challenge to be careful, be thoughtful, mindful with how the present opportunity, the present time is invested. You don't know what's going to happen, but an honest assessment would be that, sometimes things do happen. You don't have control over those things. You can't undo those things. So just be mindful, okay? Be careful. Verse 4, he that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. Now, as the balance to verses 2 and 3, it is possible for you to be too cautious. In other words, when Solomon says to sow, cast thy bread upon the waters, you go, you plant the seed, you sow it, you do the job, you give to 7, you give to 8, nobody knows what's going to happen, things happen sometimes, you don't have any control over it. Some people would look at that and they would take such a cautious approach and they would say, well, if there's potential for it to rain, maybe I'll hold back. Or, and they look at the clouds and man, it's a really, really windy day. Maybe today's not the best day to do that. It is possible to be too cautious, and Solomon is saying here that if you wait until conditions are perfect, you won't get anything done. If you wait till there's no risk of anything to get involved, to start sowing, to start doing the job, to really spend your time wisely, you won't get anything done, right? He that observeth the wind shall not sow. He that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. If you are waiting for the perfect day to say, you know what, today there's no chance of wind, there's no chance of rain, today I'll do it. That's not realistic either. It's just not realistic. It's not realistic to wait until conditions are perfect before, you get involved. You submit to the work that has to be done. You would look at that, we would look at that maybe in the grand scheme of life. We have plans, we have things that we would like to do. I'm very much guilty of wanting to get involved in things when I can control the timing, right? Because, I'm waiting, now's not a good time, and, I don't necessarily, the money's not there, or the time's not there. I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait until things are perfect before I'll commit to something or I'll get involved in something. That's not realistic. And Solomon seems to be admitting such, because if you wait until conditions are perfect, you're not going to do anything. So I've given you the caution that things happen. Sometimes things happen beyond your control. But if you're waiting for that risk to never be there, that's not realistic either. That will keep you from being busy. That will keep you from doing the work that is necessary. Solomon really seems to be pushing the importance of busyness, action, activity. If you see a cloud and you think that it might rain, I can't reap today, you're going to lose your crops, okay? MacDonald said, the man who waits for certainty will wait forever. Verse 5 says, as thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not the works of God who maketh all. There are some things that we don't know, right? As much as we know about life, as much as we have involved ourselves in science and begin to understand the way in which some things work, there are things that we don't know and we don't understand. Thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit. What is it, John chapter 3? The wind blows where it listeth. You hear the sound of it, but nobody understands quite how that works. The wind blows where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh or whither it goeth, so is every one that's born of the Spirit. Solomon gives kind of similar thought here, where nobody knows how those things work. And when it comes to childbirth, of all of the things that we know, we still understand that it is a miracle that in the womb of a mother, a child can grow, that there is development that goes on physically for a child, even in the womb, until those 9 months are accomplished and you have a baby that can be safely delivered. We don't understand or know, verse 5 at the end, even so thou knowest not all the works of God who maketh all. We don't understand, we don't always know how or why God does what he does. And since we don't know those things, verse 6, in the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thy hand, for thou knowest not whether shall prosper either this or that, or whether they shall both alike be good. Because you don't know, and we don't know what's going to happen, you can always look at that negatively. And I think a lot of times that's where our influence is, right? And that's maybe the emphasis that we put on things. Boy, because we don't know what could happen tomorrow, our baseline is we'll default to cautiousness. Or because we don't know what could happen tomorrow, we might default to the position of, well, at the risk of my work being lost or not seeing something accomplished, I won't do something, right? We always look at the future negatively. When we look in the context of, because we don't know what is going to happen, we have to assume something negative can happen, right? How often do we look at the future and, you know what, because we don't know what's going to happen, we look at it optimistically. We don't know what's going to happen. Tomorrow could actually be a great day. And this is to me as much as it is to anybody. Man, you can't see it, but Mandy's laughing up here. She knows I can be pessimistic. But when Solomon says things happen, you don't have any control over it. You don't understand the way that God works, just like you don't understand what's going on in the womb of a mother, the way that God's working there. You don't know how God's working from day to day. And because you don't know that, guess what? Get up in the morning and sow thy seed. And then in verse number 6 again he says, and in the evening, withhold not thy, in the evening, go out and sow. Get out there, be busy, do something productive. We don't know necessarily how God is going to work. We don't know the ways that God works. His ways are above ours. We can't understand everything. Therefore, who knows if maybe the Lord would bless. And he says, you get up in the morning and you sow, and in the evening you hold not thy hand, because thou knowest not whither shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. You don't know, you know what, I'm going to work. I'm going to get up in the morning, I'm going to plow this field, And then I'm going to go across the property over here. I'm going to plant over here in hopes that maybe at least one of them will yield and we'll have a decent crop, right? I'm going to put some in this kind of soil over here, and over here I'm going to plant beans, and then over here in this other kind of soil I'm going to plant this, and maybe one of them will grow. Well, maybe both of them will grow. Maybe if you get involved and you get busy and you try to fill your life with productivity, maybe God will bless it. Maybe you will live to see and to find out that it was worth it, and that the invested time, the invested effort, the money, the talent, all that was spent on it yields a great blessing and a benefit. I'm really glad that he puts this in here because if you haven't been paying attention, a lot of this book has been kind of negative. A lot of the thoughts about the future are, you don't know how much time you have, you don't know what's going on, you don't understand the ways of God, and the intent was almost negative. I'm glad now that he actually does come back to something that's positive in that. No, you don't know, okay? Because you don't know, Solomon has realized in this chapter, there's a lot of people that are going to look at that, and that's going to make them overly cautious, hesitant to be productive, hesitant to be active and involved. And he says, no, that's not the intent. You can be too cautious. If you're waiting for perfection, if you're waiting for the perfect forecast, you'll never do anything. You don't know how God works, so get up in the morning and work hard. Go back out in the evening and work hard. And you don't know. He may bless this one. He may bless that one. He may bless both of them. We have every incentive to work hard and be productive. Solomon, as opposed to the fool from chapter 10, the wisdom tells us to spend our lives productively. Okay? And this is a challenge for me, right? Get a job. And when the job is over, find a hobby, find something to do to invest and spend your life wisely, doing something. Don't slack off. Keep working hard. We don't know what activities we get involved in that God will bless, but he could bless a great number of them. Okay? And that optimism gives us the incentive to get out there and continue working hard, okay? And we sow, and because we don't know that God may maybe bless in great ways, we cast our bread even upon the waters. You say, well, isn't it foolish to go out there and sow seed in a place where you know there's potential that it would flood and that you would lose your crop? Isn't that silly? Well, that may have looked silly in verse 1, but now, once Solomon has kind of taught us that, you know what, if you're waiting for the perfect landscape and the perfect situation, that's not realistic. And you don't know what God might do. You don't know what activities God will bless. So get out there, work hard, sow seed everywhere that you can. You never know, right? There's two ways that you can look at that. You never know what could happen, or you never know what could happen, right? And just in the tone of my voice, you can tell that I'm looking at life two different ways. So under the principles of sowing and reaping, Solomon has every incentive for a young man to live wisely, to spend his life wisely, be productive, okay? I've always told, like Cece and the girls, when the day comes and you're looking for, you're looking for a husband, right? You're looking for the man that you'll marry. You make sure he's not lazy, right? He better have a job. And I say that jokingly and kind of laughing to kind of poke a little bit at my daughters or my nieces or friends. But Solomon would have a young man to live wisely, productively, and invest his life with action, okay? The guy that sits around waiting for the perfect opportunity often sees every opportunity pass him by, okay? So be busy, get involved. That's really seems to be pretty good, sound advice. All right, number 2, second thought, verse 7 down to verse number 10. the days of youth and blessing. And it's at this point his focus turns toward the thoughts with which he'll end the book. We're going to cut them off kind of in the middle here at the end of chapter 11. But in verse number 7 it says, "Truly the light is sweet. A pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun." You're going to learn later that he's talking about youth, because there's actually a day that's coming when the sun and light and all those things will be darkened in chapter 12. It speaks about those that look out of the windows being darkened. We'll talk about that next week, but he's talking about old people who lose their abilities, they lose their sight. Look at verse 8. "If a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity." You know, obviously the light here, again, compared to the blessed days of youth, strength, health, and those are great days, right? The days where you're young and you have life and you have vitality and you're strong and you have energy. Those days are a blessing. They're sweet. It's a great benefit to be able to spend those years of life. But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, let him remember the days of darkness. Old age is coming. When he talks in verses 1 through 6 about spending yourself, right? Doing the work, sowing and reaping, all of those things. You know, the day is going to come when that's not going to be nearly as easy as it is now. The days of old age, the days of darkness, compared to the young days of light, strength, health, vigor, all of those things, those days are coming. And if you live many years and you were able to spend and enjoy a lot of them, no matter how many of those years you have to be aware that the days of darkness in verse 8 are sure to come. You know, the aches and pains of old age come to everyone. I suppose there's one way to avoid those things, and that would be to die young. But obviously that's not the context with which he's speaking here. Verse 9, "Rejoice then, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth." You know, if you're young, enjoy youth. Be glad you're young. You know, be glad that you have the benefit and the blessing of youth and strength. Verse 9, he says, "Walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes." You know, maximize it. Enjoy life. Spend it, you know, joy and enjoyment. Be busy. Do things. Do what your heart desires. See all that you can see. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. It doesn't seem here, Solomon seems to try to balance that idea, right? And if you've got youth, spend it. Enjoy it. Do what your heart desires. Go and see all that you can see. Enjoy life. Remembering, keeping in mind, you know, the day's coming, God will bring all those things into judgment. So even in the spending of youth, right, even in the enjoyment of it, Solomon still has this thought of wisdom. And, you know, spend it, but spend it wisely. You know, we've got some young people here in the class. We've got definitely some that are in the Sunday school class. Our prayer for y'all and for them is obviously that you make wise decisions as you grow. We want your life to be spent in wisdom. But I can tell you honestly, we really like it that while you're young, that you enjoy life. You know, my goal for my kids is not that they have to worry about the things I have to worry about. You know, enjoy life. Take advantage of all of the blessings that being a youth affords. Now do it wisely. You know, obviously keeping in mind what he says there at the end of verse number 9, how God sees all those things. God will bring those things into judgment. But Solomon doesn't seem to have any problem at all looking at a young man and telling him, you're in the best spot of life right now. You've got youth and energy. Spend it, enjoy it, work hard, get involved, be active, enjoy all that you can. spend it wisely. You know, don't become an old man like Solomon and look back and have regrets that you didn't spend it wisely, that you didn't, first of all, enjoy it, and that you weren't active, and you didn't take advantage of the opportunity while it was there. Okay? Therefore, remove sorrow from thy heart. Same thought, right? Enjoy it. If you've got youth, maximize joy and enjoyment. Minimize sorrow and trouble. I think that's what the context would indicate. Verse 10 says, when it says, put away evil from thy flesh. He's talking about trouble. You know, put away the sorrows and the troubles from thy heart and thy flesh. For childhood and youth are vanity. Childhood is vanity because Solomon has realized now that it's so short-lived. He's just been able to go through an entire chapter, and he has described the blessing and the benefit of being young and being able to work and to do and to be active and involved and enjoy all of those things. And now as an old man, he's looking back at it and man, the time went so fast. It was so short-lived. Now he looks at it and he says that it was vanity. No one wants to get to old age and look back at their youth as wasted and not full. So cynical Solomon has showed up here just a little bit, you know, because you and I both know that he has just talked about all the benefits and blessings of youth. And then he says that it's vanity. Well, it doesn't have to be for everyone, and it doesn't have to be if it's spent wisely, if it's taken advantage of. Take the youth, take the activity, and use it, and be productive. Okay, childhood and youth can be vanity. It is vanity in the sense that it is very short-lived. It's vanity in the sense that, yeah, what we have to look forward to as we get older and as troubles increase and as weakness increases, that can be a drain on the mind in preparation of those things. But from this chapter, after he has just told us everything that happens to a fool and what the life of a fool looks like, his advice to any young man is to get busy, get productive, and spend this life wisely. I think we're finally starting to see, even through some cynicism that has built up, Solomon is starting to come to some conclusions that are sound and they're applicable. And when you get to chapter 12, he's going to compare old age to the youth. You know, chapter 12, verse 1 is a verse we're all familiar with, and it's kind of the bridge where he says to remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the days come not. While you don't have all of those things that are coming, while they're not reality yet, now is the time and the opportunity. Take advantage of it. All right. Father, we're grateful to come today. Thankful for your blessings on us.